Today I'm going to show you how I make a pearl pendant. So I have a shell that I copied that looks a bit oyster-like. It's got a nice rough outside. And I do the lost wax casting. I make a lot of these. So we have to cut the sprue off, and I just saw that off. Then I use the number 2 cut flat hand file to file the rest. And then where the sprue was, I file a little flat because that's where I'm going to solder a jump ring on. Now, a small jump ring, because I want to put a small jump ring on and then a bigger one so that it's articulated, because they look better when they move. Now this is 2 millimeters inside and 1.2 diameter wire, and I just use the shank of a drill to wrap it around. And this is 2 millimeter. You can just get a cheap set of drill bits to use as your mandrel for making jump rings if you want. I have a set that's all they're used for, the smaller jump rings. So we're going to cut one of these. I usually just hold them in my fingers when I just need one. Close the joint until it's perfect as you can get. And then I hold the joint up in my parallel jaw pliers, file a flat right on the joint using the number 2 cut flat hand file. Now we're going to solder this onto our shell. So you can see I'm holding the shell in my third hand, and I have the little jump ring just laying on the charcoal block. I do it that way so that you're not sucking the heat away from the jump ring with your third hand. Stir up your flux. Put a little spot of flux right where the jump ring touches the shell. And we're going to use hard solder. Our same old neutral flame we use for everything. And I'm going to heat my solder pick up the solder, because it's easier to place this way. So most of the heat's on the shell. I never heat the jump ring directly. I'm just circling the shell form. And that little spot of solder is now resting on top of the jump ring. So your flux will go clear, like that. And then the solder will flow. So there it goes. Now we'll quench this so we can handle it, and I'll show you the next part. Now I'm using 0.8 square wire for my pearl peg, and if you turn that in your calipers, you'll see that you'll need a 1.18 hole for that to sit in. So I'm using a 1.2 drill bit. You could just solder this onto the surface, but it doesn't hold very well. So if you have a bit of a dip for it to go in, it works better. So I'm just holding this shell in my hand, and I'm putting the peg at the same point where the little jump ring is. Aesthetically, it just looks a little bit better that way. So you don't need much of a depression, but you do need a little depression. Now, the square wire, I just pull through a square draw plate. I start with 1 millimeter wire, and it draws down to 0.8 quite easily. File the end flat where it goes against the shell form. Once again, the number 2 cut, flat hand file. Just hold it in your fingers. So just a nice flat spot on the end. Now we'll set that up and solder it. You can see that little shiny spot where I've drilled. And what I'm going to do is just stick that in that little hole. And I always have my square wire long because I want this jaw to be as far away from that as possible. So now we're going to put a little bit of flux right at the spot where the wire touches the shell. And we're going to put a piece of hard solder, once again, right at that spot. Place it with your flux brush. It's just resting against both the square wire and the base of the shell. Now, when we're heating this, we don't want to put the flame directly on that wire. Otherwise, it will just get hot. The solder will jump up onto the wire. Yeah. So you can see I'm heating from underneath. And I'll heat until the flux goes clear. Sometimes the solder will flow, and just the heat of the shell on the wire is enough for it to bond to the wire. So the flux is dry. And you can see it's gone clear now. And there it flowed. And I just brought the flame up for a second to make sure that it flowed onto the wire.